Okay, so children, I've found props.children a little bit confusing. Um, so I'm going to go into my app.js and I want to add a header. Okay, so let's make the header. Okay, so how do I've got a header and it's just like a placeholder header. So how do I get this header to render on my page? Get everything set up here.
You would just import it in your app.
Yeah, so I import it first. Is it not seeing it? Yeah, components.
You have the dot outside of the
Oh, thank you.
period outside of the quotes.
There we go. That looks better. Components, header. Okay, so I've imported it. Now what?
And you just like, call it in the return.
Yep, exactly. So I'll just put my header where I want it to go. I'm going to be crazy and put it at the top of the page. And there's our header. Okay, so let's say we also want a title. Now, the title would usually go in the header, right? But what they have the option of doing is instead of making this a self-closing component, I can say header. And yep. And I can put things inside of the header. So I could leave the header as like, this could just be something like, I don't know, H1. Let me pick on somebody else. Somebody with Ricky. Ricky's amazing recipes, right? Oh, that's really big. Okay. So if I want, let's say a subheading, right? And I wanted to leave this as itself, just the header is just being the title. And I wanted to have a subheading. I can add another component. Let's call it subheading. Sounds weird. I'm going to say subtitle. No, we'll say subheading. Subheader.jsx. Oops. It's not the one I wanted. All right. This one. So I could import my header into my, I'm sorry, I could import my subheader into my header and render it inside here, or I have the option of putting the header or the, I'm sorry, the subheader in here. So just like with the header, I would import the component. I'm going to say import subheader. And then in app.js, I can just make the subheader a child of the header. Okay. So my subheader, let's just says subheader. So if I want this to display, I can pass children or make sure that props is passed to header. And let me put this difference line so we can see it better. And then whatever falls in between header on app.js, I can render inside of header with props.children. And where is it? Did I do that right?
Looks like you did capital C, it should be a lowercase c
Where?
for in line 7 and header. Header JSX, lowercase c
Oh,
children.
that's it. Thank
It
you.
needs to be lowercase c.
There we
Capital
go.
C is something different.
Yeah.
Capital C is something that React has, but it's a totally different thing.
So props.children is anything that I put inside of the opening and closing tags in the header will then be rendered inside the header. So if I said, I don't know, whatever. So anything that appears here is going to be rendered. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions so far about children? And I mean children in terms of React. So the use case for this is if, like, say we wanted subheader to only render under certain conditions, right? So let's say that this is a surprise. Okay, so we only want surprise to render, conditionally. So I can go into my app and have it conditionally render. So I know this is going to look contrived and kind of ridiculous, but it's the only thing I could come up with. So I'm going to have a math.floor, and I'm just going to have a random number generated. So math.floor, math.random, oops. Times 10 plus 1. Okay, so I'm going to say, it's any smaller. There we go. If it's a odd number, or wait, yeah, if it's an even number, so modulo 2, I'm going to render surprise, or I'm sorry, subheader. Otherwise, I'm not going to render anything. And that's supposed to be a question mark. Okay. What did I do wrong? Math.floor. Oh, forgot to close my parentheses. Math.floor, math.random. Oh, it's over here. There we go. So now, again, I admit it's contrived, and I'm rendering it twice. Why am I rendering it twice?
It's because you have subheader there a second time.
Do I?
On line 32.
Ah, there it is. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. So now it only renders on odd numbers. I know that's kind of a ridiculous example, but you guys hopefully get the idea that if we only want things to render on under certain conditions, and the state is managed by the app, right? We can just decide to render things based on conditions, and then we can access everything via props.children. Okay. Any questions?
I'll say that one of the more realistic use cases that this is usually used for is when we want to inject information into children.
Mhm. Yeah.
From the wrapper element, right? So if we want to provide more props or state or whatever we want to change the children in some way, or we want to give something extra to the children in some way, that's when this is really helpful, because now we have access to those children inside of the parent component, the wrapper component, and we can do transformations on them there. So that's like how it's fairly frequently used, and that's in all of the cases that you'll actually see this being used. Like once we get to routing, like it's used behind the scenes. Once we get to, if you look at the context chapters, that's how context is stuff. The way that those all work is by providing more information to the children through those wrapper elements. If that makes sense.
And when you say the wrapper elements, is that like, in this case, the header?
Yeah, header would be the wrapper of subheader because it's like header had the open and close tags and was wrapping around subheader.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So if we were to do this in a more complex scenario, it's hard to show those kinds of examples in a quick demo because they're more complex. But the header component would inject some new information into the subheader when rendered as a child.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't think of a better example. I'm not very imaginative, as you can probably surmise. But if I just dynamically add stuff, like you can see that as I save it, it'll appear here. So like Christian said, this is how context works. This is how routing works. So really, if you just understand it in terms of this, when we get to routing and when we get to context, I'm just going to remind you, hey, remember when we talked about children and we could nest things and access them? That's how this works. Okay. So just kind of wanted to give you a general introduction to it. And it is, any questions? All right. Sweet.